digital futures, and we may wonder what that is. I'm going to focus on one specific small area of that, which is called the digital public space. As a tagline for this lecture, we were going to call it "The Revolution Will Be Digitized." I think we need to move on with our thinking. And the digital public space is something that came about, largely started at the BBC, and it meant that every single piece of information that they hold about every single program, every single broadcast, every single person working on that was going to become part of a digital archive. Now, the word archive is a bit of a misnomer here, because a millisecond, a fraction of a millisecond after something is being recorded, broadcast, or experienced, it becomes archive. So archive means actually current. So it's moving all of the historical information into a current experience. And we found that working across with people like the British Film Institute, the British Museum, the Tate Gallery, government, national records of births and deaths, that all of these spaces could fit together. So what the BBC realized pretty quickly was that if you agreed a common standard, which means that everything is compressed and stored and redistributed using the same algorithms, and that everyone has a common system for tagging each piece. This means that this space is cross-referenceable, which means that you can dive in anywhere and surface somewhere else. So it's a growing, living data space. And leads to what I think is essentially a new renaissance. I mean, a new renaissance is a re-renaissance. So it's not quite the right lexicon here. But the Renaissance appeared at a time when the Gutenberg distribution of books had reached such a level that knowledge was becoming widespread, and knowledge from different parts of the world and different parts of history were coming to the same space and being experienced by people from wherever they were. They didn't have to travel to find the stuff, it was coming to them. And exactly the same thing is happening now with the digital public space. And at the fourth stage, I think, of the explosion of knowledge, this is the premise that we're going to be living with. So I'm calling it 4A, but there's more than 4 A's here. Because anyone can access any piece of information ever recorded by mankind, anywhere on the planet or outside, at any time, on any single platform or more, and can access anyone else accessing that information. And that's really quite an extraordinary proposition. It leads to a number of things. It leads to new forms of narrative. It's what I would call, as I said, a revolution in knowledge, a knowledge revolution. We didn't call the Industrial Revolution the Steam Revolution. We called it the Industrial Revolution because that's what came out of it. So right now, it's not what I would call a digital revolution. I would call it a knowledge revolution, for want of a better phrase, and I'm sure the reality of this space will come to us. New forms of narrative. People will work in moving image, they'll work in deep data, they'll work in shared social networks, they'll work in written form, sound form, non-linear, multi-layered, three-dimensional experiential spaces that we will all share and can change. Because digital data itself is fluid, it's not fixed, it's not a printed book. A book is a repository of fixed information. A book is a museum. Even though that museum still has the capacity to inspire, it's still a museum. But with digital data, information becomes dynamic. It means that anyone that interferes with that space changes that space. And the fact that that space can change, it means that it's the equivalent of anyone who visits a library, reads certain amounts of books, will change the order in which those books appear to the next person that comes in, and what that information means in those books. And that in turn leads, I think, to a space which is equivalent to living cells. Now the cells of the human body, or of any living organism, are identical at the point of conception, inception, birth, but there is a stored header inside each cell which says, I'm going to see what cell is next to me, and that will define what I am. We are thinking about ways of building that level of sentience and awareness into these pockets of information. And that leads in turn to a thing which is based on swarm dynamics. We're seeing it already in our social networks, where information is spread, gathered, focused, clustered. The human brain works in this way, and what we are doing, I think, is building something which is equivalent to artificial intelligence on a global level. The first stage, I think, in human evolution in terms of knowledge distribution was, of course, speech, the spoken word, which then was accompanied by the first storable expression, which was cave painting. Then you had written form. Then you had the Gutenberg printing press revolution, which led to the destruction eventually of nation states and the collapse of Christian unity, etc. And the final stage of this, which is where we are today, is this extraordinary opportunity. So swarm mechanics, swarm theory, swarm clusters, swarm thinking, it's all based on probability. We are no longer in the place where we can actually exactly decide what's going to happen. We just have to allow it to happen and make sure that we're mentoring, understanding, and maximizing that. How do we visualize this space? How can we imagine and model it? Is it like this? This is MIT's recent model of how the inside of their space works. It's filled with words, symbols, shapes. You can point at it, you can go inside it. It's based on sensors within their building. They can listen to conversations. They can have hot areas where people are clustering. And you can see this all at a snapshot. Is it about data visualization? How do we visualize this space? How do we use it? Is it ways of finding new models for understanding this informative space? Is it just free-flowing? Do we have to up our understanding to understand what it is doing? Is it different ways of explaining knowledge that become much more about delivering new methods for learning and teaching? Can we use this space for creating, for instance, ways of teaching medicine and socially supportive thinking in extreme, kind of underdeveloped areas? Can we use ways of distributing these systems? Can a journey through this space be a new way of delivering a course of teaching? How do we discover stuff? You know, this is the model we're all used to. It's stacked, it's catalogued, it's what Yahoo did when they first developed their search engine. It wasn't a search, it was a directory. This is a picture from the Anti-Design Festival. We think this is much more reflective of how people operate and think. How do we build in mess? You know, ideas come out of where we break down those boundaries. People look inside stuff. People want to have the freedom to expose ideas and share them with other people. How should we interface with this? We've got Hollywood models of this. Minority Report. This is the map we did for the Anti-Design Festival, where we're just using words as the way of defining and understanding. So what are the right maps for this kind of space? This is the downside. This is Forbes. Half of their articles are developed, delivered, and distributed using something called narrative science. It's a technology company that's developed ways where stories can be made by machines. It's developed a technology solution that creates rich narrative content from data. It looks at facts, and then it joins them up in apparent human conversation. So we read this stuff thinking it's human to human. What vessels should we be using? This one's tiny. But it's the TARDIS in someone's back garden, or is it TARDIS full of biscuits? You know, what is the spectacle? What is our experience? Should it be something that we live with every day? It will lead to new industrial and economic models. That is without doubt, and we have to start thinking about that stuff. And how can we use that for helping? What is the issue about copyright? We ran a campaign called No Copyright, in which we copyrighted the word no. With copyright, it becomes stricter. We cannot operate. Copyright should be there as a way of helping ideas and individuals and creatives work, it's not about protecting Starbucks, distributing ways in which they own our everyday values. Learning and teaching, ownership, protection and privacy, social consequences. Are we going to lead to new ideas about governance through this global public digital space? And how do we govern it ourselves? So all at the moment we can do is pose questions. Who owns it? Do governments own it? Are they going to survey us and own us through this space and link it to our physical environments, which is exactly what's happening now? Thank you. This is Nat Hunter.